Today we're digging into something really fascinating, a real paradox from the West Coast wasteland, the new California Republic. You look at it from a distance, and the NCR, it just seems like the definitive success story after the bombs fell.
Absolutely. A massive federal republic,
Yeah.
sprawling across California, Nevada, even pushing into Oregon, Baja, Arizona.
Huge territory. And the population figures, what, over 700,000 citizens? That's incredible for the post-war world.
It really is. And they weren't just surviving, were they? They were actively trying to bring back the big ideas of the pre-war U.S.
Democracy, rule of law, liberty,
Yeah.
all of it. They seem to be actually rebuilding civilization.
But that's the paradox, isn't it? That's what makes this such a compelling deep dive. Because for, over 100 years, the NCR was this beacon, the big hope for bringing back order.
Right.
But the sources we're looking at today, they paint a different picture. They suggest the whole system was, fundamentally flawed, almost right from the start, carrying the seeds of its own failure.
So you're saying the collapse wasn't sudden, it was baked in.
That's the argument we're exploring. We're tracking this ideological corrosion, this slow slide from a genuinely idealistic democracy into this desperate, overstretched empire that was basically doomed to fail.
Okay, so our mission here is to chart that trajectory, that failure. And to do that, we kind of have to start by looking at the beginning and the very brutal end side by side.
Exactly. So the NCR gets officially founded in 2189. There was a sort of trial government before that, 2186, I think.
And the capital city, the symbolic heart of it all was Shady Sands. That was the dream, right? The foundation stone.
The utopian vision, absolutely. But then you get this gut punch of irony, the ultimate proof, maybe, that the failure was systemic. By the end, it's just gone.
Crater.
Wiped out. When did that happen? Around 2283?
Yeah, around then. Leveled by a nuclear bomb. And we know who did it, Hank McLean.
That contrast is just stark. A functioning republic built up over decades, erased. But hang on.
If it stood for over a century, and the final blow was external, a nuke, basically a targeted hit, how can we be so sure the flaw was internal? Couldn't you just argue that, the outside pressures finally got too big?
That's a fair question. And it's really the crux of it, the way the sources frame it, that nuclear blast. It was like the full stop at the end of a very long, very troubled sentence.
Okay.
By the time Hank McLean detonated that bomb, the Republic was already, paralyzed politically, it was financially broken, militarily, it was completely exhausted.
So the infrastructure was crumbling anyway.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Destroying the central government in Shady Sands was only possible because that central authority had become brittle, dysfunctional. It was obsessed with these far-flung imperial projects like the Mojave.
So it collapsed from the inside out, making itself vulnerable.
Exactly. It made itself a ripe target for that final external hit. The system rotted first, then the killing blow landed.
All right, so to really grasp how far they fell, we need to appreciate the heights they reached first. Every story like this has a golden age, doesn't it?
It does. And for the NCR, that was undoubtedly the era of President Tandy. Her time in office was just remarkable.
52 years. From 2196 to 2248. That's an incredible run.
Astonishing. And she's remembered almost universally well, isn't she? The Great Mother, they called her.
Yeah.
And during that half-century, it really seems like the Republic did live up to its early promise. The focus wasn't yet on grabbing land out east or reaching the coast.
What was the focus then?
It was internal. Solidifying the rule of law, protecting citizens within their borders, dealing with raiders, building stability. She put the actual machinery of a functioning state in place.
And crucially, it wasn't just about order, it was about ideals too, right? Trying to be better than the old world.
Yes, exactly. The sources highlight these anti-discrimination laws passed in 2205. That's quite early on.
Landmark laws, the script calls them, specifically protecting ghouls and mutants.
Which is huge context. Think about the prejudice ghouls and mutants faced right after the war. It was systemic, often violent.
So enshrining their rights early, that sent a powerful message.
It really did. It suggested the NCR was genuinely trying to build something new, something more just, not just repeating past mistakes. That earned them a lot of goodwill, a lot of legitimacy across different communities.
And this progressive thinking, it extended to the economy too, which is interesting because that's where you said the seeds of the later problems were sown.
Yeah, she seems to have been remarkably foresighted about the dangers of wealth concentration, something that, definitely plagued the pre-war U.S.
She saw it coming.
Seems like it. She brought in these quite strict anti-cartel regulations, limits on how big cattle herds could get, how much land one person or group could own.
So trying to stop monopolies before they started.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It wasn't just abstract regulation. It was aimed squarely at these powerful emerging groups,
Yeah.
merchant houses, big agricultural lobbies like the Republican Farmers Committee and the Stockmen's Association. She was trying to keep them in check.
So putting a cap on economic power to prevent it from corrupting the political system, keeping the democracy for the many, not the wealthy few.
That seems to have been the goal, a noble one. But, well, Tandy wasn't immortal.
And once she was gone in 2248, those checks and balances started to erode.
Almost immediately, it seems.
Mhm.
That's when the big ideological shift really kicks in. The leaders who followed her, particularly Wendell Peterson and later, crucially, Aaron Kimball, they changed course dramatically.
How so?
They moved away from Tandy's model, sustainable growth, focus on the core territories, and they pivoted hard towards aggressive expansion. Militaristic expansionism, our sources call it.
The priorities flipped. Protection became conquest.
Pretty much.
But how did they manage that politically? Tandy's policies must have been popular, established for decades. How do you just dismantle that?
That's a key question. It seems they tapped into a growing anxiety about resources.
Yeah.
After decades of Tandy's consolidation, the NCR population had grown massively.
Right, the 700,000 figure again.
Exactly. So there was a genuine rising demand for essentials, water, power, land for farming. Leaders like Peterson and Kimball exploited this. They argued Tandy's cautious approach was now holding the Republic back, choking it.
So they used nationalism, framed expansion as survival, not greed.
Precisely. They spun this narrative that the only way to provide for all these citizens was to push outwards, to seize new territory and resources. They convinced the public, and crucially, those powerful merchant and farming groups. Tandy tried to limit that expansion was necessary.
And the big prize, the resource that really fueled this imperial hunger.
Had to be Hoover Dam. The power, the water. It was the ultimate jackpot in the desert.
And going after the dam and New Vegas, which sits right next to it, that fundamentally changed the NCR's mission, didn't it?
Completely. It shifted from protecting citizens to projecting power, acquiring external resources no matter the cost. That decision, that lunge towards imperialism, that's arguably the point of no return, the start of the fatal flaw taking root.
And imperialism means war, which leads directly to the first big military sinkhole for the NCR.
The Brotherhood War.
Yeah.
Started sometime in the late 2250s, early 2260s.
And initially the NCR did well, didn't they? They had the numbers.
Oh yeah, they scored major victories early on.
Yeah.
They had the organization, the manpower to push the Brotherhood, who were always more secretive, more focused on tech, into hiding, pushed them underground, into their bunkers.
Won the battles, basically, drove them out of key areas.
They did. But the Brotherhood, they're tenacious. And their whole focus was grabbing advanced tech. They never really went away. They just became this persistent, highly skilled, simmering threat.
So the NCR didn't really win, they just inherited a long, costly occupation.
That's a good way to put it. It became this constant drain. Manpower, supplies, equipment, all getting funneled eastward, away from the core territories, away from internal stability.
It was the first big sign that expansion was costly, even against a smaller enemy.
Absolutely. And maybe it conditioned the NCR leadership, to accept this kind of constant, low-level bleeding of resources as just the price of doing business, the price of expansion.
Okay, so we've got this ideological shift towards empire, the constant drain of the Brotherhood War. But underpinning all that, making it worse, was this massive structural weakness they created themselves, the financial mess.
Ah, yes. The money. Or lack thereof, eventually.
Let's talk about that core rot. It really seems to start with the decision to abandon the gold standard.
Fundamentally. That decision, probably made around the turn of the 23rd century, was just catastrophic in the long run.
What was their reasoning? Why ditch gold?
The official line was that gold was too scarce, too concentrated in certain areas to actually support this massive, rapidly growing frontier economy they were building. They needed something more flexible, they argued.
So they introduced their own paper money, the NCR dollar, backed by what?
Backed by the full faith and credit of the new California Republic. Which sounds okay until that faith starts to wobble.
And as history shows, backing money just on a government's promise, especially in a place as unstable as the wasteland, that's risky.
Extremely. It led, as our sources say, to inevitable inflation. Confidence just seeped away.
How bad did it get? We have a specific number, don't we?
We do. By 2281, so right in the thick of the Mojave campaign, the NCR dollar was trading at only 40% of the value of a standard bottle cap. It's devastating, and we need to unpack why the humble bottle cap held its value better than the official currency of this huge republic.
It's about what backs it, isn't it? The caps, thanks to the hub merchants who standardized them again, were backed by water, the single most vital commodity.
Exactly. Tangible value. Water doesn't inflate away. Its value is immediate, universal in the wasteland. The NCR dollar. It was just paper, backed by a promise from a government that was increasingly seen as overstretched, corrupt, and losing wars.
So the fact that a cap was worth 2.5 times an NCR dollar, that's basically a vote of no confidence from the entire population.
Total collapse of faith. If people don't trust your money, they fundamentally don't trust your state, your governance, your future.
And this financial mess, it just poured gasoline on the fire of political corruption, didn't it? It empowered the very groups Tandy had tried to control.
The Brahmin barons. Yes. When Kimball rose to power, those economic limits Tandy put in place on land ownership, herd sizes they were systematically dismantled, just ignored or overturned.
Which let the big agricultural players consolidate huge power.
Immense power. These Brahmin barons controlled the food supply, essentially. The huge Brahmin herds needed to feed the army, feed the cities. They controlled that flow.
But how did that translate into political power? They still only got one vote each, right?
It wasn't about the ballot box. It was leverage, access, influence.
How?
Well, first, control the food supply. If the barons even hinted at withholding grain or meat deliveries, the state, especially the military out in the Mojave, was instantly in trouble. That's huge leverage. Second, they became major financiers. They bankrolled political campaigns, especially Kimball's expansionist platform. They got lucrative government contracts for supplying the army. They effectively became the chief lobbyists, ensuring laws were written or ignored to benefit them.
So their wealth bought influence, completely bypassing the democratic ideal.
It created a system beholden to these wealthy agrarian interests, not the common citizen, a political machine fueled by Brahmin stakes and campaign donations.
And if you were a regular person trying to fight back against this, the system wasn't on your side.
That's where the judicial system comes in, or rather fails. Our sources are pretty critical of the NCR courts. They were notoriously slow, ponderous.
So say you're a small farmer and a big baron's ranching operation is polluting your water, trying to sue them.
Forget about it, practically. The legal process was expensive, the courts might be hundreds of miles away in Shady Sands or Hub, and cases could drag on for years. Justice was effectively inaccessible for the average person trying to challenge powerful interests.
But for the big players, the system worked just fine.
Oh, absolutely. While the courts were slow for the little guy, they were efficient at enforcing contracts that benefited the powerful merchant houses, groups that were crucial to the expansion effort.
Like the Crimson Caravan, gun runners, Fargo traders.
Exactly. These groups became indispensable. The gun runners supplied the army's weapons. Crimson Caravan handled the vital and very profitable logistics of moving everything out to the Mojave.
So because they were needed for the Imperial project.
The government essentially gave them carte blanche. Once they had a contract or a favorable law passed, the slow, cumbersome judicial system made challenging them almost impossible. It wasn't just corruption, it was the institutionalization of elite power and exploitation, all wrapped up in the language of law and order.
Okay, so let's pull the threads together. We've got an NCR that's financially shaky, politically corrupted by these elite barons and merchants, and ideologically driven towards expansion.
A pretty toxic mix.
And that sets the stage perfectly for the ultimate gamble, the peak of their imperial ambition, President Aaron Kimball's Mojave campaign.
Started in 2253, the big push to annex New Vegas, grab the dam. This was Kimball's legacy project.
And he really sold it with that grand rhetoric, didn't he? That quote, "Today, you are the waves of the Pacific, pushing ever eastward."
Pure imperial language. Manifest destiny reborn in the wasteland. But the reality on the ground, it was a logistical nightmare, a human catastrophe waiting to happen.
Stretching supply lines across hundreds of miles of desert.
Yeah, hundreds of miles of hostile territory, moving food, water, ammo, troops from California, all the way to the Colorado River. It required constant, massive effort and resources.
And it made them completely dependent on those merchant houses like Crimson Caravan, didn't it?
Totally dependent, which of course cost the NCR dearly, both in caps and in political capital. Even senators back in California, people who initially supported the campaign, started raising alarms.
They saw the cost. The drain.
They saw they were bleeding resources, pouring troops into this distant meat grinder. They were mortgaging the Republic's future, its stability, on this one incredibly risky gamble in the desert.
And that strain wasn't just financial. It hit morale hard, right? Especially among the experienced soldiers.
Absolutely. Which brings us to Chief Hanlon, a really tragic figure in this whole saga.
He was a ranger, right? A hero from the First Battle of Hoover Dam, known for being smart, tactical.
Exactly. He masterminded that brilliant trap at Boulder City, luring the Legion in. He represented the best of the NCR military, effective, strategic, careful with soldiers' lives.
But by 2281, during the main push for Vegas, he was disillusioned.
Utterly demoralized. He saw the campaign for what it was. Not a strategic necessity, but a wasteful ego trip for Kimball, costing countless lives for little gain. He saw the endless, pointless bloodshed.
And his despair led him to do something pretty extreme.
Incredibly extreme. He confessed, later, to falsifying military reports, doctoring the numbers.
Why? What was he hoping to achieve?
He was hoping the inflated casualty figures, the understated successes, would convince the command back in California that the whole Mojave operation was unsustainable, that they'd finally cut their losses and pull out.
Wow. So basically committing treason, risking everything out of desperation to save his troops.
Motivated by heartbreak, it seems. Imagine being a decorated war hero, resorting to that. He had this quote that just sums up the futility he felt. Patrol the whole length of the Colorado for hundreds of miles. Holding this dam, it'll be the death of us.
Chilling. He saw it as a suicide mission dictated by politics.
The suicide pact, yeah. Driven by politicians and generals safe back in cushy offices while his rangers bled out in the sand.
And Hanlon's warnings, his strategic insights, they were ignored.
Largely ignored, yes. And a big reason for that was the man in overall command of the Mojave campaign, General Lee Oliver.
He seems to embody everything that went wrong with the NCR's leadership by this point.
He really does. Oliver was, first and foremost, a political animal, a staunch supporter of Kimball and his expansionist agenda. His military competence, though, rivals, even his own junior officers, saw him as a glory hound, more interested in photo ops and making Kimball look good than in sound military strategy.
And his tactics reflected that.
His main approach was just attrition. Mass troops, overwhelm the enemy with numbers, accept high casualties. Predictable, unimaginative, brute force.
Which sounds like a terrible way to fight in the desert against enemies like the Legion.
Exactly. And crucially, it meant he sidelined experienced voices, especially from the Rangers like Hanlon, who advocated for more flexible, hit-and-run tactics suitable for the terrain.
Is that why the troops have that nickname for him? General Wait and See.
That's the one. Because his strategy was just to wait, amass forces, and then launch these big, costly pushes. It was slow, grinding, and assumed the NCR had an endless supply of bodies to throw at the problem. He treated manpower like it was cheap.
Didn't even his enemies see the flaws? I remember reading something about Mr. House's assessment.
Oh, yes. Robert House, the ruler of the New Vegas Strip, analyzed Oliver's strategy with his usual cold logic. He called it tunnel vision. Said Oliver was so focused on the dam, he was ignoring critical Legion movements elsewhere.
And House had that chilling probability calculation, too.
Right. Based on his psychological profile and the immense political pressure, House calculated that General Oliver had a 36.5% chance of committing suicide if the NCR failed to take New Vegas.
36%. That tells you everything about the stakes for Oliver personally and for Kimball politically.
It wasn't just a military campaign anymore. It was Oliver's entire career, Kimball's entire presidency, riding on this one battle. And that kind of personal pressure leads to terrible strategic decisions.
So to get a real sense of the mess on the ground, the direct result of Oliver's leadership and Kimball's ambition, we should look at Camp McCarran.
Yes, Colonel James Hisu's perspective from McCarran, the main NCR base near Vegas, is brutally honest. His words cut right through the propaganda coming out of Shady Sands.
What did he say? How bad was it?
He was blunt. He admitted the NCR military was basically stuck, bogged down. They weren't just fighting the Legion. They were constantly harassed by local groups like the Fiends, the Great Khans, who were hitting their already overstretched supply lines.
So fighting a multi-front war of attrition, just trying to hold on.
Exactly. Exhausting, demoralizing. And Husey knew they weren't winning. He even anticipated defeat. He explicitly said that if Robert House ended up taking control of New Vegas, if House won the political game, the NCR military expected they would have to withdraw, pack up and go home.
Wow. So the commanders on the ground didn't even believe they could achieve the primary objective on their own?
It sounds like it. Husu referred to the whole Mojave area as a hornet's nest. They saw it as a liability, a drain they couldn't sustain without either politically impossible reinforcements from California or basically cutting a deal with someone like House. They were trapped between ruinous victory and humiliating defeat.
Okay, so the picture by the early 2280s is grim. The NCR is politically gridlocked, financially broke, militarily exhausted and bogged down in the Mojave.
Republic on life support, basically.
And all these issues of corruption, the bad economics, the military overreach, they all seem to stem from something deeper, don't they? An ideological failure at the core.
Absolutely. And perhaps the most piercing diagnosis of that failure came from an enemy. Ulysses, the Legion Frumentarius.
The former Courier 6? Right.
Yeah.
What was his critique?
He gave this really insightful, almost poetic analysis, focusing on the NCR flag itself, the two-headed bear.
What did he say about it?
He said the symbol perfectly represented the problem. The two heads were always fighting one another.
It's politics and military. Or something
That's
else.
the interpretation, yeah. Or perhaps the original ideals versus the drive for expansion. One head representing that Tandy-era vision, democracy, liberty, rule of law. The other head representing the aggressive imperialist machine, the one driven by the barons, by Kimball's ambition, by the need for resources.
And those two things couldn't coexist.
He argued they were fundamentally incompatible, mutually exclusive, tearing the Republic apart from the inside. You couldn't be both the idealistic defender of freedom and the ruthless conqueror annexing territory.
He had that great line summarizing their struggle. They have an idea of trying to do good, never quite getting there.
That's it. Crippled by the internal contradiction between their founding principles and their actual actions, between their ethics and their greed. They never figured out how to reconcile the dream with the reality of governing a large, resource-hungry state in the wasteland.
And this weakened, internally conflicted, paralyzed state, it was the perfect target for the final blow.
The ultimate disaster. The nuclear destruction of Shady Sands. Around 2283, carried out by Hank McLean, it was almost the physical manifestation of that internal collapse Ulysses talked about.
The consequences must have been immediate, catastrophic.
Instant and total. That blast didn't just flatten a city, it decapitated the entire NCR government. The executive branch, whoever succeeded, Kimball, gone. The entire legislature gone.
So the vast, overextended republic suddenly had no central leadership.
No head, no direction. The entire administrative structure, already strained, just failed. The logistics keeping the Mojave campaign barely alive, severed. The ability to coordinate defenses, manage the worthless currency, enforce laws across that huge territory, evaporated overnight.
And the fallout, no pun intended, spread quickly across their territory.
It did. Our sources confirm that by 2296, just over a decade later, the NCR was in full retreat, not just from the Mojave, but from large parts of New California itself, the core territories.
The Imperial Project didn't just fail out on the frontier, it imploded the heartland.
Exactly. They were forced to pull back, abandon settlements, consolidate what little they had left.
And then came the final symbolic defeat in their own backyard.
The Battle of Griffith Observatory, 2296, right in the Los Angeles area, the Boneyard. What remained of the NCR forces there, interestingly led by a rogue figure, Lee Moldover.
They were defeated. By who?
By the Brotherhood of Steel, the same group they'd fought decades earlier. The Brotherhood, apparently resurgent in the LA area, delivered the final blow, confirming the collapse of any significant NCR power in its own birthplace. The heartland was lost.
So looking back at this whole story, from Tandy's idealism and stability, through Kimball's disastrous ambition, Oliver's incompetence, Hanlon's despair, right up to Shady Sands being literally wiped off the map.
We pull all the evidence together, that core fatal flaw we talked about at the start. It wasn't really about the Legion or the Brotherhood or lack of resources ultimately. It was the NCR's failure, maybe inability, to learn the real lessons of the Great War.
What do you mean?
Instead of building something truly new, they ended up just uncritically adopting the absolute worst practices of the old world, the very things that probably led to the Great War in the first place. Greed, unchecked power, unsustainable growth.
And we tracked how that self-destruction played out in three key areas. First, the politics collapsed, right? The erosion of democratic control.
Wealthy elites, the Brahmin barons, basically capturing the state, overturning Tandy's protections, using the courts as their shield. Democracy became secondary to profit.
Second, the economy just corroded from within. That fatal weakness of the fiat currency.
Yeah, the NCR dollar, leading to runaway inflation, people trusting bottle caps more than government money. It made the Republic financially unable to keep its promises, pushing it towards desperate gambles like the Mojave.
And finally, the military side. The sheer hubris of that unchecked expansionism.
The Mojave campaign epitomized it. It broke the bank, it broke morale, it turned heroes like Hanlon into broken men, and it put incompetent yes-men like Oliver in charge because they told Kimball what he wanted to hear. That overreach was the final straw.
So this internal rot, the corruption, the bad money, the imperial ambition, it basically guaranteed the collapse. The Republic was already dying on its feet long before Shady Sands vanished.
Absolutely. The massive effort poured into the Mojave, driven by that old world hubris and greed,
Right.
was the final act that broke the Republic's back. It left it hollowed out, vulnerable, ready for that final physical blow.
Yeah.
Destroyed from within.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? The NCR was the biggest, most organized, most successful attempt to bring back the ideals of the old world democracy, law, liberty. And yet, it seems it was ultimately destroyed by inheriting the flaws of the old world, too. That insistence on huge scale, the systemic greed, the political ambition. If that project failed because of those inherent problems, what does it say about any attempt to rebuild complex civilization in the wasteland? Is complexity itself, that drive to get bigger and bigger maybe? Is that the real fatal flaw we should be worrying about? Something for you to mull over after this deep dive.